Good morning. Now, thanks to Patricia, because my presentation builds a lot on what Patricia was saying, because it's about communication. It's also about reflection. And this is something that is very controversial in terms of can we tell lies to people with dementia? The caveat to this is not everybody in the room is going to agree with me. That's absolutely fine. This is about starting the conversation and thinking about where do you sit yourself and where do you sit in terms of professional and where do you sit in terms of your personal, because they're not always the same. And hopefully this will challenge you to think about a few of those things. Please catch me afterwards. If it's something that you don't want to. It's meant to be interactive. You'll need your phones, and if the tech works, it's brilliant. If not, I'm going to have to fly to David's expertise to try and get the bits moving. But we'll see how it goes. So, the first thing is, what is dementia? I just need to clarify, because there might be a few people here who aren't used to the terms that I use. So dementia is an umbrella term that covers a whole host of illnesses. Over 104 different types of dementia have already been diagnosed, separated. So it's a bit like saying somebody has cancer, tells you nothing. But under that umbrella, what we do know is that most people with dementia will experience memory loss, mood changes, and difficulty with communication and reasoning. And the presentation might be slightly different, the causes are different. However, globally, that umbrella term of dementia covers these illnesses. And personhood. Now, those of you who I've met or spoken to before will know that personhood, for me, is the key to everything. How do we establish relationships? And Thomas Kitwood was taken as the person who developed or first mentioned person-centred care. And all of our governments talk about person-centred care world over. For me, it doesn't exist. None of us exist as an island. And none of the documents actually mention personhood. And this is the cornerstone to what we do as nurses or health, or even people really. A standing or status that's bestowed on one human being by others in the context of relationship and social being. And this is where we're starting to fall down, because building on what Patricia's just said, our young people are not establishing their personhood and relationships. So that means that quality of life becomes very difficult to establish and develop over a period of time. Now, when Kitwood wrote this in 1997, he was talking about people-to-people relationships. When I talk about it, I would extend that to it means our relationship with our environment and with animals in particular, because we all, some people don't like to be within lots of people. When I've been in Singapore for a few weeks. I come here 10 times a year to run my programs, so I'm really desperate to get home. And it'll be nice to see my husband, but the dogs and the chickens and my horses are my priority, because that's what establishes my personhood. Everybody knows me as the woman in the village with too many animals. That's fine. But should I ever be admitted to hospital, I'm not quite sure how people are going to support my personhood. But at least my chickens and my dogs will have to be brought in. And in England, bringing chickens into hospital's fine. And we have a whole thing called the pensioners, where we actually establish that. So today, I'm looking at the use of props. And part of our personhood is, what do you need in your life to make you, you? What is it that you need to have there? And personhood underpins relationship-centred care. None of us make decisions in isolation. Therefore, to say person-centred, and sometimes I do smile in some of the Asian countries, Asian collectivist societies, for the government to say you need to be autonomous and make your own decisions, when the senior male in the families is always, and culturally will always make the decisions. It's about relationship-centred care. How do we keep that personhood so that the person that we're supporting has strong enough relationships to govern their own care within the relationships that they exist. So this is the last kind of bit before we get a bit more interactive. This is really important in terms of personhood, and some of you I know have heard this before. But people are like bookcases. Everybody has two bookcases. One is really solid. It's kind of Harry Potter, it's from Universal, it's carved out of wood and it's sitting there in the Great Hall. That's your emotional bookcase. And as dementia or the wind blows, this bookcase full of books, it doesn't move. You can have as much dementia as you like. Your emotions stay intact. So that link with personhood, you are still you. You haven't gone back to being a child. You haven't lost any of the things that you had. You may not be able to think as well, but your emotions are still intact. A person with dementia will pick up and validate. So that interactive field that Patricia talked about, I would probably call emotional intelligence. A person with dementia will still pick up how you are. If you come in, a person with dementia will get really upset, but they don't know why. You have to be very calm and very kind, genuine. The other bookcase, however, is from IKEA. And you went, oh yeah, I don't need the instructions. And you've got 2 screws left. And it's really wobbly. This is your thinking bookcase. And it doesn't take much dementia for that top shelf of books to start falling off. And that top shelf is today's memories. Then last week's memories, last year's memories. And you go down in the shelves till you get to the knees. And actually, even when dementia is very advanced, people generally stop at around their late teens, mid-20s, and that's generally where they move to. Sometimes it's called time-shifted reality, all sorts of different names. But what we need to work out in terms of personhood and what props might work is which shelf are people on? Because working out which shelf you're on becomes essential in maintaining relationships. Because for the person with dementia, it's the relationships on the shelf that they're on, not the relationships that you have today that are important. And the other question to ask yourself is whose truth is important? Now, I have big issues with this because a lot of the people I work with in Singapore, one of the directives is you have to reality orientate. I have big issues with this. A lot of other Asian countries, you have to orientate. And England is just starting to move away from this. Because why is my truth more important than the person with dementia? Because I've got all the power, basically. Because I've got the uniform. But actually, should we not work with the person with dementia with their truth? Because if I live in a world where somebody is constantly saying, your truth is wrong, your truth is wrong, I'm right, it becomes a very disheartening world to be in. And it becomes very easy to stop wanting to communicate. So whose truth for me is really important. And I don't feel that I need to have that power. And if somebody, I never think that it's terribly helpful to say, this is not your house, it's the mental hospital. Doesn't really kind of work in making somebody's day better. Your mother's dead, you're 84, is not a particularly helpful phrase. So for me, it's about whose truth, and that will always be the person that I'm caring for. So what is a lie? So this taxonomy comes from, I don't know how well you can see that, from my PhD research a few years ago, where I did an ethnographic study and I put my staff nurse's uniform on and I went into practice and I observed all the lies being told for 45 shifts. It caused carnage with ethics. It took 2.5 years to get it through ethics. What will happen when you publish if nurses tell lies? No, we do tell lies. But if the public find out and the newspapers get it, but we tell lies. But you can't tell lies. So this went backwards and forwards. But eventually I did the study. And lies in the centre, and I picked up 6 of these categories. So for today, I'm just looking at the props section. So that was dolls, soft toys, objects, false environments, and false money. False money was particularly important. And a prop is something, it's an inanimate object, it's just a thing, can be anything, that you use to interact with a person to which you ascribe values that may not be true. So, thinking about doll therapy. I always hated doll therapy. Shouldn't use it, that's infantilizing. Until I had a lady who I was working with in a care home who became distraught. Her daughter visited every single day. And every night when her daughter left, the lady became distraught. But she'd been a nanny. So it was, oh, shall we use lorazepam? Shall we use a benzo? Daughter's crying, mum's crying. She'd been a nanny. So we gave her a doll, but we gave it as a lie. We didn't say, do you want to play with the doll? Because the answer is no. It was like, the baby's crying. Mary, could you help? It's something on her shelf that she's always done since her 20s. So she takes the baby doll, and it was the one that had the batteries in that cries and does all sorts of things. Stopped it. Her daughter then said, Mum, I need to go. And she'd say, just stop the baby. You just stay with her and I'll pop out. And the daughter could leave. Elaborate lie or supporting personhood? I'm not going to say which one it is. I know which one I thought it was. And for somebody that doesn't like doll therapy, it worked because it was person-centered and it supported personhood and it used her truth and her skills. False money is brilliant. In England, as in many parts of the world, often, particularly men, like to have cash in their pocket. They've always had cash in their pocket. They're not part of the credit card generation when you look to the over 80s. Somebody's pinched my money, where's my money? And the man was starting to turn tables over. So somebody whipped in, Google, false money, printed it off, put it out. Really sorry, Bob, I found it, you've left it in your bedroom. Oh, thank you. It instantly diffused it. Elaborate lie? Yes. Ethical? For me? Yes. Not for everybody. Now, hopefully, this is going to play. I just want to show you this clip of robotic pets. This is becoming more and more, almost stepping away from doll therapy, but I'll play the clip first. I'm just going to play bits of the clip, so I'll jump if it works. This is where I hold my breath. Only animal which either wasn't high up on a restaurant list or caused fear was a seal pup. So there was lots of other animals that people don't tolerate. You know, if you walk around Singapore, you see relatively few dogs, for example, and you never see a loose cat. If you go up to Malaysia and to Sarawak, there's cats everywhere, but that wasn't going to work for different people. So it was about, so that was why Caro became a seal. So I'm a bit reluctant to use the barcode because we'll have to change, so we'll not use the barcode. If anybody wants to add comments after, you can go onto the QR code and put them. But, you know, were they being used as a lie in those clips? And the dog one particularly, Tombot, I think is hugely useful. The cat one, in England, we have a curled up cat that you can get them in the toy shops that purrs, that's also quite useful. Its fur is a little bit less scary than that cat that I showed you. But those dog ones, the Tombot ones, there's also one called Biscuit that's really useful. And Biscuit is a Labrador that sits, it's about that high, that can stand up, that you can feed it biscuits. And what we've got to think about, you know, is anybody giving these and saying, here's a toy dog, play with it? No. We give them and say, could you walk the dog? Could you stroke the dog? And the amount of emotional support and distress that this reduces is massive in people. The downside people argue is if you use these and then the person becomes distressed. So this has got to be in people with moderate to severe dementia who have very, very little short-term memory. On one data collection day, there were used, I had a lady who, she had a lot of soft toys on, there weren't robotics. And she came up and said, the dog is sick, I must go to the vets now, I can't feel its heart beating. And her dementia fluctuated. And she was probably at a stage where, you know, we have to be very careful as to whether we're going to use them as a lie, because she still had some bits intact. It didn't distress her and she forgot very quickly. But can we give them, could you in your practice use something else to support personhood? Thank you. Reflection is key. Your answer might be different for different people, and it should be, because no care, we can't say this works. We can say this works for this person. What we can say is this is more likely to work under this set of circumstances. So from my original research, I created the LIARM, the Effective Reflective Model. And what became obvious as I collected data was actually not what you gave somebody and not the content of what you said, but how you said it. You can go up to somebody with dementia and say, rhubarb and custard. They will still shake your hand and say good morning because you've followed a social norm, a social principle, fits in with the work of Steve Sabat. So what becomes really key is I'll have to put my glasses on to find my printer, is the genuineness and why you're doing it. So as I collected data, people were much kinder and worked much more towards the needs of the patient early on in a shift. I have big issues about long days where you're doing a 12 or 13-hour shift, because there's no way you can be as kind and as genuine and as motivated at the 11th hour as you were at the 3rd hour. So what tends to happen is over the day, we become less effective and less therapeutic, because instead of trying to meet the needs of the patient, you start to just want to disengage. I've got my notes to do, the night shift are coming on. Let us out, let me out, let me out. I haven't got a key. I've just seen you come through the door with a key, was one of the bits of data that I got. Now, to be fair, the gentleman, about 7 seconds that distress lasted and he moved on and was straight back and had the key. But that was when somebody was near the end of the shift and they were very tired. Most of the time, when we do things or tell lies, we're ineffective. It doesn't do it. And a lot of the lies that I collected were actually, it was a bit like Tourette's. People just tell lies. It's a social lubricant. It's a really important part of how we talk. There's lots of people who have got up here this morning and put makeup on. Clearly, I'm not one of them. But, you know, you put mascara on, you try and change how you look. You might Photoshop. These are all integral lies that are important to us, but nobody actually says you're deceiving me, because we accept them. And actually, we should. People need to present themselves how they wish within parameters, of course. So reflecting on something, where I work in the northeast of England, we think lie telling, largely led by Professor Ian James. As somebody is admitted to one of our mental health wards, an older person, staff will actually have the conversation with the family and say, how do you feel about lie telling? If your relative becomes distressed, what do you think about it? So we understand how they feel about it. So we talk openly about it. And what was interesting was when I put the study through ethics, they said, you have to talk to families. And Every single family I spoke to, you know, do you use lies? Yes, I have to get through my day. And it wasn't an issue for them. It becomes an issue for healthcare professionals because we've got codes of conduct saying we have to be truthful and honest. However, it goes back to, yes, but whose truth are we using? Because I'm truthful and honest to the person with dementia when I'm using their truth, not when I'm using my truth. And this is something I'm challenging the code of conduct in the UK with at the minute, and working with the NMC to try and get a clause put in similar to that confidentiality. We should always be truthful and honest, except where the truth is likely to cause harm or distress, in which case we may revert to the patient's truth. So it's about thinking about how do we reflect on it. If you say something with genuineness and kindness, it will nearly always work. Gear it up to meet the needs of the patient, which we don't always do. It's very rare, and out of 258 bits of data I collected, there was only one that was ineffective and negative, and that was the gentleman with the key, and it only lasted about 7 seconds. So the argument that I often get to, you can't tell lies, it will ruin the therapeutic relationship. It doesn't happen. And this is the only study where we've done this as an ethnography, where it's been observed, the lie that's been told, it's been triangulated, and we've gone on and observed the outcomes for both the person with dementia and the staff. All of the studies that say it'll ruin things, it doesn't ruin things. And they've only asked staff and their thoughts afterwards. So we've really got to start rethinking and talking about lie telling. Sometimes I was asked by a journal, could you write this up as a tool for nurses to use? Yeah, no problem. The reviewers have sent it back and said, can you take the word lie out of it? No, you've missed the point. So I've written back and said, could you take the reviewer out of it, because I'm not keen. So this is something, you know, the whole point is we need to talk about lie telling. The key messages for me are, props are a valuable tool. I think they work really well. They can lower distress. They're particularly useful on wards where, you know, it doesn't matter how much we say we should have more staff. Every country in the world that I work in, they don't have enough staff. So if you can give somebody something that's going to maintain personhood, even for a relatively short space of time, I think that has value. It sustains relationships that still exist for the person with dementia, and do it for the right reasons. Do it because you need to meet their needs, not because you don't want to engage with them. For me, props are an effective intervention, as is lie telling. I think lie telling can support personhood and does support personhood. A lot of people are not comfortable with that because they think that you can't be genuine and tell a lie. For me, genuineness is an emotion. It's not a verbal communication. And my truth is no more important than the truth of the person with dementia. Done.